You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is Thursday, July 24th, 2025, 7:35 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And we often get the question, what happens if only one person in a group decides to undertake the attachment training? This could be a family, it could be a couple, it could be work. What happens if only one person undertakes changing their underlying attachment strategy in favor of something more secure? You might think that that was an always beneficial outcome, but what it really means is that all of the attachment agreements that you've made, you're going to have to renegotiate if somebody else doesn't come with you along the journey. Most of the time, when you come into beginning to examine your attachment conditioning and see how it affects how you perceive yourself and how you perceive the world and how you form relationships, you come because there's a degree of dissatisfaction in the way that that's all going. But often, if you're in relationships with other people and they're not so dissatisfied with the way the relationships are going, they're not coming because they're good with the way that the attachment arrangement is operating. So when you look at insecure and disorganized people, we don't see that many secure people come around for attachment repair. Sometimes if you're natively secure with features, we'll see it, but it still tends to fall into that paradigm of a sense of dissatisfaction in how relationships are negotiated and how to effectively change that so that they can be different than the way that they've been going. If you're in a relationship and the other person is satisfied with the agreements that you've made with them to be in that relationship, but you are not, they're not so motivated to change the terms of the agreements. And so you might find some conflict there. That's the main stumbling block. In disorganized people, because of the volatility of the relationships and the lack of reliability in the relationships, often both parties can be quite dissatisfied with the dynamics of the relationship, but not both be willing to change it. And if you come from a family system that's insecure, disorganized, and you decide to do the attachment work, you are going to also probably bump up into having a role in the family that keeps the family more or less stable. And if you decide that you don't want to do the role anymore, other people in the family system having to step up and take on parts of the role in order to keep the family stable. And so you might encounter a lot of pressure to maintain your position in the family. It can get quite theatrical in terms of what people do in order to pressurize you so that you'll stay in the role that you had. In the sort of average dynamic of an insecurely attached relationship, one person is going to be on the dismissing side and one person is going to be on the helplessly preoccupied side. And it usually is the preoccupied person who comes to do the attachment work. And it's usually the dismissing side that is okay with the terms of the relationship, mainly because the person on the dismissing side is getting their needs met. And they're typically the ones that are not reciprocating with the preoccupied person to take care of that. when you begin to present these dilemmas, and often what you'll see, at least from my side of it, where I'm doing the instruction often, is the very reluctant dismissing person dragged to the class by the dissatisfied, preoccupied person, insisting that they take on the information, and often being very helpful in pointing out what they think applies to the dismissing person. And of course, the dismissing person then turning on idealization as a way of managing and being very compliant and very agreeable, but not willing to do any of it, really. So it can be quite confusing. And then you'll notice a frustration in the preoccupied person that they're completely unlike the way that they are when they're not in front of the group that they want to look good for. But I do think that you should understand that if you're going to undertake doing attachment work, that all of the attachment relationships that you have are going to have to be renegotiated. And often the way to do that is to say something along the lines of, I know that we did have the agreement in such a way, but it's not sitting well with me, and I would like to renegotiate the agreement so that it's different and it works better. Most of the time, people will be willing to do that unless it's really very transactional, very role-based. Disorganized people, um, because uh, the their capacity to mentalize the different dynamics of the relationship is low, they often have a hard time understanding what the dynamics of the relationship are. And because their experiences of relationships are either confusion because they come apart and they don't really understand why, or in some way they're exploitive. Uh, what you'll notice in disorganized people, toward the middle of the 30s, disorganized people tend to withdraw from trying to maintain close relationships. So they have some relationships, but they don't tend to be what we would call an A or a B relationship. The alphabetic designation for relationships I adopted from see if I can pull the name out of my head. Robin Dunbar's work. Robin Dunbar is an English researcher, and he looked at originally he wanted to know whether or not there was a limit to the number of faces that you could recognize that was structural to the brain. And in the early work, he did not distinguish between three-dimensional representations of a face and two-dimensional representations of a face. And in the later work, he added that discernment. But about 150 3D faces is what he thinks that the brain's capacity is for, and about 5,000 2D faces is what he thinks the capacity is for recognition. That is to say, at that 5,000 number, that you can distinguish whether or not you've seen the face before with some information. That making sense? So when you think about it, how many faces can you recognize in a 3D presentation? Then he looked at whether or not that number, 150, was represented in the way that we structure society. And what he found was sometimes with the number of police that are required for a community below 150, because you can recognize everybody. There isn't necessarily the need for outside policing, but once the number gets higher than that, then you could use it as a multiple to understand how many police that you needed. Were there divisions of the military divisions in corporations, and he found that number repeated, so that the physical capacities of the human body are then reflected in the way that we structure um, society formally. Then he looked at how many people do you need to know to be happy, and what kind of relationships are those? And he came up with this structure: above the line relationships where you tell people everything, and below the line relationships where you tell them some things. And then in the above the line relationships, some people like to have a primary relationship and some people don't. And then how many relationships beyond a single primary relationship would you need in order to feel that you were well supported in your the activity of your life? And what he found was that most people, the maximum number of primary relationships they want is one, because it takes so much in the way of resources. And that the secondary relationships, which are close, between 2 and 5, depending on how resourced you were. And that's the extent of the number of people that you need, that you're completely open with. And then below that, C relationships, between 30 and 40 of those in the early research. So people you tell some things to that you encounter routinely as you live your life, I would like to say. A relationships, people you see on a daily or every other day basis. And B relationships, people you see on a weekly or a monthly basis. B relationships, weekly or monthly. C relationships, monthly or quarterly. And then D relationships, rounding out that 150, at least yearly. What I found was interesting in working with people is often that they keep their families in the D group, that they see them only on holidays, right? Otherwise. Or they take out their ruler and they measure the globe and live exactly the furthest distance away from where their family lives. And this is, of course, people who are young enough to still be involved in the work life of a work life in society, so that you're out and about in the world. And of course, as you get older, the number of people that you see drastically shrinks. In the later research, he devised close Cs from regular Cs, and so 10 or 15 of the C group became quite close almost to the extent of being a B, but a person not having enough time, energy, and resources to really attend to the relationship well enough that they would, you could categorize them in that way. Is that making sense? I like to use it as a rubric because when you have attachment disturbances, it also can affect the way that you structure your social relationships, and you can begin to get a sense of how the attachment conditioning that you have is affecting your capacity to hold a full relational group. Do you want to have an A person, and do you have one? Do you want to have a B relationships? Do you sometimes like to have friends with benefits type relationship with the B group rather than just a single A person? How many of those do you need so that you have access to somebody whenever you need them? What does that really mean? In a collaborative emotional regulation system, you want to be really brilliant at the way that you take care of your own emotional regulation. You want to be able to do it for yourself whenever you need to, but it's also perfectly ordinary to get yourself into a situation where you're emotionally dysregulated and you can't regulate yourself. In which case, you need to turn your attention to somebody that you're confident can help you emotionally regulate, and that would be your A or B group, most likely. How many of those then do you need? So there is always somebody available to you to help you emotionally regulate it when you need it. That would be the question, is a way of calculating. Maybe the close C group could also do that. I worked in rehabs for 12 years, and when I would talk about the dynamics of developing a social life, it was very unusual in that environment for people to have anything like that number of relationships. Often no A's, no B's, and years without them. Paul?
George, I'm actually wondering, and non-innocently, because it's actually something I'm trying to do right now, about in terms of renegotiating the terms of relationships, like promoting up, so to speak, like trying to, I mean, both figure out like who among C and D group might be good candidates for,
Right.
like a B group or something that they might be helpful at emotion regulate versus if they're just not capable or they don't want to, exploring to find people. And is that part of what you're thinking of today in terms of discussing how to, as we earn security, renegotiating relationships, but also, I guess, running along parallel to that is actually trying to establish new ones that might better fit this kind of structured, life supportive way of going about relationship cohorts. I may have added too much, but hopefully the core question came through.
Yeah, I did, I think. So one of the things about adults is they tend to make commitments. But one of the other things about adult relationships is they're subject to impermanence, like all things are. And so they come and go. One of the things about secure people is that they like to have their relational opportunities filled. And so one of the differences is in terms of your thinking as you prepare to stack up your relationships, is that secure people go slowly and you have to demonstrate that you're trustworthy by being trustworthy, which means that they give you opportunities to prove that you're trustworthy, and you have to be good at showing up in a way that the other person thinks is trustworthy. And so that's also one of the things that you should adopt for yourself, is to go slowly and give people opportunities to present themselves in a trustworthy manner, like they show up and they do what they say they're going to do, and they're reliable in regulating you. And then pay attention to how often you have contact with them. And if you find somebody that you want to begin to move up into a closer position, what you do is you adjust the frequency of contact that you have with them. But you don't want to go from a far C to an A relationship in a few days or a few weeks, because you'll exclude so many people from doing that. It's only insecure people that would really be willing to accept that expression. But if you're used to talking to somebody every 3 months, then you would keep track of that and then talk to them every 2 months or every month. If you spoke to somebody every few weeks, you might speak to them every other week, and gradually move forward in that way. But what you're really looking for is how committed are they to other people, and waiting for the opportunity to invite them closer if space opens up. The thing about secure people is if they have an opening, it doesn't take them very long to fill it. And so if you're not already in the group around them, there isn't going to be time for you to get in line, fill it. And so one of the things about this is you're always tending the garden of your relationships here. You're making sure that you have the number of A's and B's that you want, but then you're making sure that you have the close C's, which is where you're going to get the replacement A's and B's. Or as if you're just developing, A's and B's. You're going to get them from your close C's, which means you have to cultivate the close C's, which is a group of people that you see monthly, right? So you have to make sure that you have that happening. Now, if you're not used to managing complex social relationships, it might seem daunting at first, but it really is a way of keeping track of things and keeping track of contacts and making sure that you uh, reach out regularly. So now, if the question is, what if most everybody knows in the C category and not closer? This is a question of authenticity. So one of the things about secure functioning relationships is they're based on authenticity, that you tell the truth, you have evidence to back it up, you give a complete representation of what your experience is to the other person. And that's above the line. Below the line, you don't do that, and actually you don't have an obligation to do that. But in above the line relationships, you do have an obligation to be authentic and complete. But you also have to license that with people. There's, a million different ways. Some people have said, we've bonded, right? Or uh, I really like you, and I have a sense that we can talk, and I was wondering if I might talk to you about something that's a little bit intimate. However you want to manage licensing that, you license it by getting consent that you can move the relationship into a more intimate place from a less intimate place. Is that making sense? And then you give them a small piece that you would need to trust them with. One of the ways that you can tell whether or not you've overexpressed yourself is if you're worried about their response to it, or you're worried about if they don't keep confidence. One of the things about intimate relationships is, what is the agreement in terms of confidence? If you have an agreement with somebody that you tell them everything, you can't make an agreement with somebody else where you restrict content, right? That's one of the restrictions in relationships. So B relationships are a little bit more open than A relationships. In an A relationship, you could make an agreement. Well, actually, the point of an A relationship is that you take your personal primary exploration and put it into second position behind the needs of the relationship, so that the relational needs are primary. That also means that whatever goes on in the relationship is confidential, and that means even to the B group, it's confidential. One of the things in Dunbar's research is that he found that the most stable primary relationships were like what he called an A and a half, that the one or both parties had a designated person who they could share the experiences of what was happening in the A relationship, so that if you needed to talk to somebody about it, you had the other person's permission to do that. And if you don't have the other person's permission to talk about what happens in the relationship, you're not actually supposed to talk about it with other people. And even so, the rule is usually that if you were talking about your partner and you didn't know that they were listening, that you would not say anything about them to someone else, that they would have trouble hearing you express to someone else, so that there is that protection built in to the care of the other person. But your understanding as I'm saying that, how substantial that commitment is, that you put your primary exploration needs in second position, and you put the needs of that relationship above all other relationships. Paul?
Thanks, George. I guess, to extend the understanding to how this contrasts to B relationships. So B relationships, you would be forthcoming, authentic and so on, but the level of care might be limited to like emotion regulation. When you're available, they're available, as opposed to very clear on you wouldn't put your own primary exploration needs on hold for the relationship.
Right.
But might there be other kind of support and caregiving? I mean, I'm thinking of classic things that we think of, and I mentioned before, like, I don't know, their car breaks down. Of course, I'll come get you and help you move your car,
Right.
that kind of thing. Whereas you might not do that with a C, D person.
Yeah, you might not.
Be a lot. I guess you'd be a lot less inclined, like, or available for them to do that kind of stuff. But
I think
but there'd be sort of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, one way to think about it is in a B relationship, if they called you and said, "I need your help," you would say, "Okay, where are you? I'm coming."
Right.
That would be it.
Right. And but as opposed to like this A 1.5, you wouldn't have a B. Maybe there's just free. You don't even need to maybe expressly negotiate it. If whatever you're having a tiff with one of your B people, of course you're going to go talk about it with someone else. So you don't really need
Right.
to have an agreement set to that,
Right.
or
You don't.
allowing
Yeah.
it.
You pre-agreed that that person can hear about it. You know, one of the things about intimate relationships, of course, if you do get into a fight, uh, it can be embarrassing to you if everybody knows about it. And so you have to protect your partner in that respect. But it's also very difficult not to have any. If you have a primary relationship, that's also your main source of emotional regulation. If they stop regulating you, you have to be able
Mhm.
to turn to somebody else
Yeah.
for
Right.
regulation.
Right. Sorry, and if I wasn't clear, I was referring to like some of the other characteristics of B type relationships where they're not the primary. There's not this quite as same amount of time and resources for caring for each other in the relationship. And
Right.
I'll give a maybe a contrasting example. Like, I have a group of friends. I consider them like the C type. We see each other often, actually every other week, but at least once a month.
Right.
And two of them are in like an unbelievable dispute with each other right now.
Uh,
And the way that most of us learned about it is other individuals came to us to report
right.
that so and so had a, but there wasn't this like understanding that, well, of course you can talk about others in the group because this is our agreement. That hasn't existed. And so it strikes me as, well, probably not appropriate for these people to even think of them as B group, or wouldn't promote them because
Right.
like imagine it was a B group. Like, I guess what I'm asking, would you imagine this is an important thing to actually discuss expressly, like have a, above the board, like, hey, what do we do when we have a disagreement with each other? Versus it's just kind of understood because that's the nature of the relationship, and you wouldn't formally express that kind of agreement, which you would do in an A. That's what I'm saying. An A type relationship, for sure, you need to express like, yes, we're definitely on board. We understand it. We verbalized it. That you're
Right.
going to go to someone else. Blah blah blah. But
In a B relationship, everything is licensed. So,
okay,
what is confidential and what isn't confidential, and then depending on the dynamics of the group, the group might agree that I mean the group of your group of Bs, do they know each other? Do they not know each other? They might not know each
yeah, fair
other,
point. Right.
depending on what it is. And uh, what is it in each of those relationships? What is it? What does it mean to keep confidence, right? And so, if you have an agreement with somebody where you don't break confidence with anyone else, and that would be what you're being held to. And then if you get into difficulty with that and need regulation from somebody else, other than that, how is that manageable in a way that is acceptable to both of you? And that needs to be licensed ahead of time, not after. Uh, so, but all of these agreements are to be made when you're feeling stable and good. not when you're in crisis. the So that's kind of the thing. If if your B group socializes together, which also it's if you have close friends and your close friends have close friends, it's likely that you're going to encounter your close friends' close friends. They're not going to be You're not going to have the same intimacy with them. They're going to be C's or D's. And then what are the agreements about disclosure? What are the agreements about keeping confidence? As soon as you violate somebody's confidence, the trust in the relationship is gone, and they fall out of being A or B's into C's or D's because you don't feel safe. It's one of the great wounds in close relationships is a betrayal of confidence, because that puts you in a position of no longer being able to treat the relationship as confidential. So how do you even broach the subject of the violation of confidence if you can't trust them to keep it confidential? That's the dilemma. So it's a very precious thing to get somebody to be completely open with you. It's unusual. That's why a question about what if everybody knows the sea is not so unusual. And it does take a lot of time, energy, and resources to hold those relationships together, and a lot of care over time. If you base it on uh, their capacity to emotionally regulate you, then and you tie that to your exploration, that you can go out and take really big risks in your exploration, because if you get completely sideswiped, you can come back and they can manage that distress that you're in and help you regulate it. It's an extraordinarily valuable thing to have in your life, because it affords you the opportunity of exploring it in such a deep way that it's worth the time, energy, and resources, and the care that it takes to maintain those relationships. And if you can line it up so that what they're exploring and what's meaningful to them is in line with what's important and meaningful to you, the exchange of information around discovery is really also essential to a deep discovery. So it's a no-brainer at that point to try and maintain the relationships. But for people who don't have much experience in those kind of intimate relationships, it can be puzzling why you would make all of these commitments to somebody, having not had the benefit of somebody supporting your exploration at that level. Is that making sense? But the one of the things to begin to do if you want to begin to uh, develop these social networks is to pay attention to how often you have contact with them, and then pick people that you think would be a good choice to become closer to, and just gradually increase the frequency with which you see them. And they will let they will let you know whether they want to do that or not. And then not to take it particularly personally, because as adults, most of us are so committed that unless there's a loss of a relationship, there's not going to be space. But you still have to keep them on the back burner, bubbling along, because, like I said, secure people, they'll lose somebody, there'll be a period of grieving of that person, and then the window of new relationship will open up, and there'll be a lot of candidates already in place, and you won't have time to get in line. So, you meet a secure person and they lose a relationship and they say to you, I'm not really looking for a new relationship right at the moment. You say, totally fine, let's just hang out and be friends. And then you're putting yourself in line for that. And then when the window opens and there's a possibility, you can step forward. Um, Dunbar also said that most people lose a significant relationship every 2.5 years. So that it isn't like there's never a possibility. And 2.5 years actually isn't that long in establishing a relationship. So the rhythm, that rhythm makes sense. We have quite a mobile society. It isn't always that the relationships break. It's that the opportunity is different. You have a bee and they get a job across the country and off they go across the country. And then they're not proximate to you anymore. So they can't really be a bee. They become a close C, really. And then you have that space that you want to fill up with somebody else. And that's everybody. Or they pass, yes. That happens later. Depends. Uh, so in an A relationship, if you got somebody offered you your dream job, it's the thing that you've been working your entire life for. Uh, you're in LA and the job is New York. You'd say, "I'm so excited about that. I'm going to have to talk to my partner about uh, whether or not we can do this or not." And then you'd come to the partner and say, "I got this great job offer. I'd love to do it, but I know that it's in New York, and you would have to uproot yourself in order for me to take the job. Is that something that you would be willing to do?" Whereas if it were a B, you'd say, "I'm having a party. I'm moving to New York." And one of the big conflicts I notice in couplings is one person is in an A relationship and the other person is in a B relationship. And so the one person is always feeling that they're overcommitted to the relationship because the other person doesn't really respect it in that way, or they don't keep confidences very well. If you can't, if you can't trust that somebody will keep your confidences, you can't be fully open with them, right? And so you're relegating to a C and not to an A or a B in that regard. How many do you need? That's another question. I love that title. How many friends do you actually need to have a full, happy, supported life? And and do you have the time, energy, and resources to support that number of relationships? I remember several years ago, I had 5 Bs, and it was hectic. And so as time went on, and I lost some of those relationships, I didn't replace them. But then also, it can be hard to find a replacement sometimes. Well, uh, back to our original question is, what do you do if you're adjusting your attachment conditioning and the rest of the world that you're in is not adjusting their attachment conditioning? Then you're going to have to renegotiate those relationships. Most of the time, in C or D relationships, it's not so much of an adjustment, but it can be quite a bit of an adjustment in a B or an A relationship, particularly an A relationship. And so around here, we actually do have support for that, where you sit with a facilitator to help negotiate the terms of the relationship so that it changes. Sometimes it's hard to see uh, what the advantages might be to adopt a different way of being. But you enter into a dialogue, and then there is also the possibility that sometimes the relationships aren't renegotiable in a way, and so they change into something different than what they were. But the person who's coming in to attempt the change if they can go through with it, will be able to negotiate different relationships that are a better support, a better fit for what actually they want. And really what we're focusing on in this life is the pursuit of primary meaning. What makes you feel a sense of purposefulness in your life? And what kind of relational support do you need to have so that you can actually engage in those activities over a long enough period of time that they come to fruition? The different attachment strategies tend to have different exploration profiles. Secure people tend to be in balance and form supportive relationships and are able to pursue that aspect of meaning. Insecure people on the dismissing side tend to be lopsided onto secondary exploration, the gathering of time, energy, and resources, and light on primary exploration. Preoccupied people don't explore enough, and so there needs to be some refocusing on learning to explore and then orienting toward primary exploration. And disorganized people, the patterns of their lives are a lot of beginnings, some middles, but not many finishes, because they can't make the relationships work in order to have the support that they would need to really pursue something. Long projects require, dedication over a period of time with a lot of support to make sure that they come into fruition. And if you don't have that, you can't complete them. So the idea is to then really see how you've structured that for yourself, what is going to be useful to you in terms of what you need, and then the process of every day putting in the time, energy, and resources to support that so that you have that available to you. And then over time, be able to reach fruition on the things that you're pursuing. Make sense? What do you say we do a little bit of meditation? What would you like to do? Insight, hard practice, or ideal parent figure? Insight, hard practice, ideal parent figure. One or two. We have a tie. One. You all right with insight? Two. David, you have to go with one or the other. You can't go with both. How's that? All right.
I don't know, George. I just voted for the first time in Australia. We have your preferential voting, so your vote is never wasted. You say first preference one, second preference two, or whatever it means.
I started out with one, and I thought, well, I'll go with the crowd.
Going with the crowd.
All right. Insight. So we'll do some concentration practice and then some insight practice. So go ahead and settle in, closing your eyes, scanning through the body. Okay, let go of the meditation. How's that? All right. So what's coming up? On August 9th, I'm going to start a level 1 for meditation and addiction. So if you're interested in that, it's 3 Saturdays, the 9th, the 16th, and the 23rd. We have a level 2 class that started on Thursdays, and this would be the last week to join if you wanted to. Let's see, what else is happening?
What time is the Thursday class?
4:30 to 6:30. I'm going to do a workshop on September 5th for meditation and addiction, but I'm going to do it more on the professional side, so that if you're a helping professional and you're involved in that world, it'll be a conversation about how that might be helpful. I'm going to do 2 exploration workshops in September on the 13th and the 20th. That's the intermediate and the advanced mentalizing. On the
What time of day are
19th,
those?
they're 9 to 1 on Saturdays. I'm going to do an attachment workshop on September 19th. And I think that's going to, and I'm going to start a meditation and addiction level 2 September 15th. So that's the meeting Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 6 to 7 p.m. for 12 weeks. So that's what's coming up this summer. If it's interesting to you, take a look at it. For beginners, the addiction class is for beginners, but its focus is on addiction. We're then going to do a level 1 starting on October 11th, which is for beginners. August 19th. September 19th. September, it's actually October, I think, is the October 11th, the level 1 that's the beginner class. Anyway, it's on the website, so take a look there if you want. I offer the teaching freely, but I do hope if you're able to, you'll make a donation. There's a link to make a donation on the website. Really appreciate your practice. It's good to see you. I hope to see you soon. Bye.